Thank you for joining today's webinar, Mastering Cannabis Operations, 5 Steps to Financial Success. My name is Rain Carpenter, and I am on the Silverleaf marketing team. I wanted to let you know that today's session will be recorded and sent to you following today's event, along with some helpful resources. So keep an eye out for that in your inbox. Today's session is part of a 4-part series. So if you find these helpful and want to join us, please join us in about a month in February on the 22nd for our next one, and then in March, and then again in April. We do not foresee having time for questions during today's session, but we are happy to answer any question that you might have. So please email those over to insider@silverleafcbc.com. With that, I will hand it over to today's presenters.
I'm Sara Silver, and I'm the Director of Horticulture Solutions at Velocio. And I have been working with Microsoft ERP platforms for over, for over 20 years, and I'm working in the cannabis industry for 8 years. Jennifer?
Hello, I'm Jennifer Phoenix, and oh gosh, I think I also have 20 years in the Microsoft Dynamics space. And I currently lead the cannabis vertical team. So we focus specifically on cannabis implementations. And we've been doing so for quite some years now, me specifically and personally since 2018, but it sure feels like longer.
It does. Well, we always say cannabis has a timeline of its own.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Today we're going to be talking about our software product, Silverleaf, and then we're going to talk about 5 steps to financial success, how our solution will help you with your role in financial reporting and accountability, basically. And then we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. So first, let's talk about what Silverleaf is. Silverleaf is the software solution that we have written on top of Microsoft Dynamics Business Central. Business Central is a world-class ERP that has hundreds of thousands of users around the world with a focus on manufacturing and distribution. And when we got in the cannabis space, as Jennifer and I mentioned a few years ago, we realized that our core ERP was really a great solution for this industry, but we needed to add some specific functionality. So Silverleaf is the app that sits inside of Business Central to handle the cannabis-specific industry requirements. We're on the Microsoft App Source, and we have several multi-state operators using our solution. So today we're going to talk about, as I mentioned, the 5 steps to financial success: reporting by dimension, intercompany activity, costing, data integrity, and scalability. I'm going to highlight how our solution Silverleaf can accomplish each of these things. So first, we're going to talk about reporting by dimension. Before I get too far there, what are dimensions? Dimensions are a way for us to segment our GL and our financial reports and all other reports without having a cumbersome chart of accounts. So it's very easy to maintain dimensions. You can add them and remove them quite quickly. You don't have a lot of clutter in your chart of accounts. And you can run any report by any combination of dimensions. Oops, excuse me. Some examples of dimensions you might use would be department, product line, customer type, region, and salesperson. So with dimensions, you could get an income statement or an analysis report by any combination of dimensions. Suddenly, you're able to slice and dice your data all kinds of ways. So let's go ahead and hop in the software and take a look at this. I'm going to first show you our chart of accounts and how simple the one I use is. I'm going to open the chart of accounts, and you'll see we just have a basic 5-digit code for each of our accounts. We don't have a dash with a sub-account for a division or a department, etc. We can have a very easy chart of accounts. So now I'm going to go into the dimensions options. These are the different dimensions I have set up in my company. You'll see I've got brand, country, customer group, department, license type, product line, etc. Country might not be that relevant in our space. That's some sample data. If I go ahead and open brand and look at the different values, you can see that I have 4 different brands. I didn't get creative in their naming. In product line, we have some different product lines that we've set up that we can then assign to our items. I've also got customer group. So as you can see, this is real simple, real world terms. We don't have to have complicated terms. If we want to add a new group of customers, we can simply add it here, and that dimension is now ready for us to start using. If we decide we no longer want to sell, for example, to private label, we can block that dimension and we'll no longer be using it in our transactions, but it's always there for us to report on. So once I've set up my dimensions, I can then assign defaults to my customers and my items. So if I go look at one of my customers, I'm going to pop up Cannabis, and I can go under their dimension options, customer dimensions, and here you'll see that I've assigned them to the customer group wholesale, the salesperson AG, and a certain territory. So every time this customer purchases from us, these dimensions are going to flow through to our GL. So suddenly I'll be able to run a report and pivot it based on maybe what customer group and what product line they've purchased. This column here says that they're always going to be in the customer group wholesale and the territory Southern California, but the salesperson might change. We have to have a salesperson on the account, on the transaction, but it could be edited. I can do the same thing on our items. If I hop into one of our, go into our item list and pop up one of the items that we sell, I'll pop up our gummies. I can go ahead and look at the dimensions on the gummies and see that we've assigned them to the product line of edibles, brand 2's brand dimension, and the license type of cannabis. That license type triggers some other activity that we'll show you in a different session. So now I'll be able to easily see what customer groups purchase which items, and our users who are entering the sales orders don't need to edit this data. It's not data that's not more keystrokes for them. It's all going to flow from the customer and the item card. So there are going to be transactions you have that aren't going to come from a sale, so it's not going to default from the customer item. For example, maybe as we're going to do some marketing literature on our gummies, and we need to contract with our marketing department to provide some collateral. So I'm going to go ahead and I've received an invoice from my marketing department, Marketing Works, and here we'll see that they chose, let's say, we did marketing research, let's say, on the gummies. So we've created an invoice here for marketing research is our GL account, but then I've been able to code this to my different dimensions. So I've coded this invoice to marketing for edibles and brand 2. So again, now this will flow through to my GL when I post this invoice. When I look at GL account 62100, we'll have these different codes. So suddenly we could run, show me all of my marketing expenses for edibles or for brand 2. I could even run a P&L and I'll see the marketing expenses, the trade show expenses, and everything relative to the sales. Finally, when we get into our financial reports, we can also run those by any combination of dimensions. In Business Central, we call our financial reports account schedule. And I've got one that I've created, which is my income statement. And if I go down into my salary section, I've just created kind of an income statement that's not super exciting. But if you look at my salary section, I've got a row for my salaries expenses 3 times. Once I'm showing the department sales, once I'm showing the department production, and then my third line is anything that's not sales or production. So in other words, this data's flowed through to my GL. I can create a financial report where I look at my GL accounts and break out by rows or by columns any combination of dimensions. When I go to look at my income statement, I can go into the overview. I could also print this. My data is not very exciting. Let's see, we'll do this for 2. I don't have much data in here, but you'll see. So here's my income statement for 2022. We can see the values in each of these cells. And then I can also filter this on dimension of cartridges. And notice how, oops, I thought. Oh, I'm sorry, I put it department. It should have been product line. So now we can filter it on product line cartridges. And notice how my values changed. So on the fly, I can pull up any income statement by any combination of dimensions. Lastly, you might have a sales manager who doesn't understand a lot about income statements, but he's interested in getting a report of maybe which customers purchased which items. And we can do that through an analysis. It's called an analysis view. I'm going to open my sales analysis view. I've set this up that I want to look at my income statement accounts, and I want to analyze it by these 4 dimensions. So when I go into analyze, do analysis by dimensions, let's go ahead and put in the date range. And look at it, for example, by product line. And we could have our customer groups across the top. And look at our matrix. So now we can see revenue by product line, by customer group, and we can even drill into this data to see the transactions. Again, I don't have very exciting data in here, but we could break it out by any combination. So that's a little bit about dimensions. Jennifer, do you have anything to add where you've seen customers use dimensions effectively?
A lot of times what I'll see specifically, it definitely depends on what aspect of the cannabis industry they're in, but a lot of times looking at the different product types or brands, a lot of times people really want to be able to look at their revenue and their costs by brand for specific and use dimensions for that, or even their different product types. So, we kind of had a product line dimension there, and that might be somewhat equivalent, but let's say you produce vape cartridges and you also produce extracts, things like shatter and things like that. So then we can segment that and be able to look at how we're doing in each of these various product areas. Really, we can slice and dice our data any way we want to. There's lots of possible options, and I've seen people really do some unique and interesting things with dimensions, and it really can take us beyond even what we typically see in QuickBooks segmented accounts into something that really becomes a lot more 3-dimensional than that, which I think is very cool.
Awesome. Thank you for that input. All right, so I skipped the demo slide. So let's move on now to our next, number 2 is intercompany activity. We all know in cannabis, you are going to have multiple legal entities. If you're in multiple states, you might have different ownerships. You might have your corporate structure can be set up all kinds of creative ways. We've seen everything. And so it's very important that your financial solutions support multi-company operations. But often the same people are working in multiple companies. So we want to make it as easy as we can for them. So with Silverleaf, you'll be able to create as many unique financial entities as your structure requires. You can set security by company, so you'll know maybe certain users can only go in certain companies. You can have different processes in different companies. So one state might be a metric state, and another one might not have any state track and trace, and you only have to report to the state. So each company can have different processes. Maybe one's a cultivation company and one's your processing company, your sales company. You can create a buying and selling relationship between your companies. So your cultivation company can sell your product to the processing company, whatever makes sense. And finally, you can report on individual companies financially, or you can consolidate them to get an overall picture. So let's go ahead and look at the multi-company features in Business Central and Silverleaf. So the first thing I'd like to show is how many companies I have set up. Mine are, of course, all sample data, but I've got about 12 companies set up in here. We've seen companies organizations that have more than 100 companies, and you know, it's tough work, but it's a lot of work, but that's just the nature of their business, and they're able to support it in Silverleaf. To kind of ease the pain of managing a lot of companies, Silverleaf includes a feature we call Company Central. I didn't bookmark this. I could, but we'll just go into, oh, I did bookmark it. It was on my menu. The Company Central menu, you'll see here, allows us to do a bunch of things. We've identified, for example, different date settings for different companies, what dates we're allowed to post to in each company. We can maintain users here. We can even sync our GL accounts, our dimensions, and our vendors here. So this way we can have multiple companies, and this kind of minimizes the administrative overhead on that. Jennifer, do you have anything to add about Company Central? You were a key component in the development of the solution and the functionality, given your background as a controller in the past. So you knew what people needed here. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think a lot of the times it's just like what you said, it's the administrative overhead. You know, for example, we need to lock down posting date ranges in each of these individual entities. Now, rather than having to go in and do it 80 times, and we have a customer that had at least 80 entities,
Yeah.
you know, they can do it with just this one click of a button. We also found that because of the entity structuring that happens often in the cannabis industry, you know, where they have to separate legal entities in order to be compliant with the states and take advantage of, you know, the tax breaks that they can get, which are a lot more limited than a lot of other industries, they structure their entities a lot more separated. And this allows them to be able to have the same chart of accounts, like you said, or you know, and a lot of times the same vendors. That was one of the more recent additions that we have here to Company Central. And it's really been a game changer for a lot of our customers, because while it only takes a minute or two to set up a new vendor, you multiply that by 10 even, and now you're at 20-30 minutes of your day, whereas now we can set it up once and just push it through to the other companies. So we see a lot of time savings here. And we've also even added some smaller features here, like just some visibility to the, like we can see here in the fact boxes, the unposted journal batches. And it's just to make sure that as we're sending things back and forth, as we're doing things in each of these companies, a nice quick way to glance through and make sure everything's done that needs to be done without having to hop into each different company.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite tools in our suite of products. I don't know. So excited I get about it.
We know. Another thing you'll have to do if you have multiple companies is you might have to, of course, create an invoice that you're going to spread across multiple companies. So for example, if I open, before we looked at the Marketing Works invoice that I spread the marketing research across different departments, well, I can also take an invoice and post it across multiple companies. So here what I've done is I've created an invoice for office supplies. $1,000 went to the admin department in my sister, one of my other companies, which is Silverleaf Company 2, and maybe some of this expense is also going to stay in my company in the admin department. So now I've posted this invoice for $1,500, and if I go in and look at, let me put in the invoice number and go under the preview posting, we can see here that this is going to post our intercompany due to and due from. So here's the journal entry, and it's going to post that $1,000 is owed to the other company, or the other company owes us, excuse me. Okay. I mentioned earlier, you can also create a buying and selling relationship between your two companies. So maybe in this company, I've grown some product that I now want to sell to my other company, to Silverleaf 2. So when I create a sales order, my customer has been set up to identify that they're an intercompany partner. So this company is set up, this customer is set up with a code that says they're one of my trading partners and what the GL accounts are related to those transactions, intercompany transactions. So here I'm going to sell my company to some Blue Dream flower. And again, like I did on my GL side, if I go in and preview the posting, we can see that this is going to show when I actually sell this to this customer, what my due tos and due froms will be. So I've got this intercompany activity. Okay, so hopefully you can see how this will really help you with your intercompany operations. Let's go back now and talk about costing. One thing we've seen a lot in the cannabis space when we work with customers, particularly those on just spreadsheets or QuickBooks and spreadsheets, they really don't know what their costs are, or they've got kind of a huge costing spreadsheet that's, they're never very comfortable with, and it's a lot of manual work. So the benefit of having a full ERP solution, of course, is that all of your costs will be tracked. In Silverleaf, you'll be able to identify what costing method you want to use, and you'll be able to identify overhead that you want to assign to items. You'll be able to set up labor costs or production machinery costs in your work centers, and then actually roll up your costs on a finished good that includes all the material, all the labor, and all the overhead. And we also have a feature that is called item charges, but you might know it as landed cost. And that allows us to assign other costs to our products. So maybe you get a freight bill and you want to assign that to multiple products that you received. So I'm going to hop over to the demo and we'll take a look at some of these features. So I'm going to start with one of our items that's our biomass that we're going to purchase, that we might have purchased. I have two biomass items, one that I grow and one that I purchased for demonstration purposes. And if we come in and look in the costing section of my setup, I've set this up to be a standard costed, a FIFO costed item. And you, of course, can choose which costing method you want to use. Part of our conversations and our implementation is to discuss what the right costing methodology will be for you. I'm using FIFO, but you'll see it's always tracking an average cost for me. The system will keep FIFO cost layers, and when I sell something or consume something, it'll always use the oldest layer first. But I'm also getting a unit cost, which it's kind of keeping track of as an average, just to kind of keep an eye on it. I can add in here, if I wanted to, an indirect cost percentage. So if I always wanted to, every time I receive it, add additional cost, I can do that. If I look up here a little bit, you can see I have on hand in inventory 20,708 grams of this item. And when I drill down, I can see all the different tags associated with it and what the costs were that I received it at. Because we can track overhead and expected cost and those landed costs that I mentioned before that I'll show you in a moment, we have a tool called value entries. And the value entries will show you all the adjustments that have been made to your cost of any one item. I think I've always purchased this at 75 cents, so I don't see very much. But again, if we had an adjustment or a landed cost, you would see that in the value entries. So this gives your cost accounting team a great, a treasure chest of data that they can drill into to really understand their costings. So this was on the item. Let's go ahead and look at a work center as well. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my packaging work center. When you set up a work center, you can identify actually, yeah, we'll use this one. This is okay. Yeah, I'm going to use a different one in a moment. I'm going to show you a different work center. But basically on this one, I've set up our packaging work center. We've identified that it costs $35 an hour to run this work center, but we also want to add an indirect cost of $15 plus another $10. So every time I plan to use this work center, it's going to estimate $50.25. And then as I enter my actual costs, it will accrue the machine center costs during the production time. So I've created costs of my components and costs of my work centers. Let's now go look at a finished good and see how this all rolls up. I'm going to go back to those gummies that we looked at before. And I'm going to go ahead and open what's called the rolled up cost shares. And I'll compress this a little bit. You'll see that my 10 pack of gummies is made of 10 individual gummies, a label, a dram, a box, and then it's going to be in the packaging work center. As I explode this, I can see all the material costs that go into the gummies, and also I can see the work center costs as well. So I've got my lab, I've got time in the cooktop that I'm tracking the cost for, and ultimately it's rolling up a total cost on my item. I scroll across here of $46 per pack of 10. Might have some crazy costs in there, but you get the idea. It can all roll up. And so this again gives you great visibility. In fact, when I first was setting this up, it showed my total cost was about $8,000, and I realized I had set the unit cost with the wrong unit of measure, the wrong time. I had it for hours instead of minutes or something like that. So it's great visibility into what your costs will look like. In another session in our webinar series, we'll look more at how we set up these bill of materials for production. Okay, and then as promised, I'm going to show you how you can do a landed cost. So I've already started an invoice to save a little bit of time. We'll go back to the purchase invoices that we've already looked at. And we've got a third one. So I've received a bunch of product from my vendor, but we were paying the freight. So then I received a bill from Acme Trucking for $1,000. So I've set this up, instead of hitting a GL account, I'm hitting what's called a charge item. And my charge item I want to use is freight. So from here, I can go into what's called item charge assignment. And I can choose to get receipt lines, and I'll see all my purchase receipts that have come in. So maybe when we want to assign this freight, we know the receipt number we want to assign it to. It's this one, and I'm going to assign it to these 3 lines. So when we received this purchase order, these 3 things came together. So I can pull them in, and now I can choose how I want to assign them. If I chose equally, it's going to assign $333 to each line in the inventory. I'm going to choose by amount, and now what it's going to do is prorate it based on the value of each item that we received. So my glass jars are getting the bulk of the item charge assignment, whereas the labels are getting just a little bit of that. If I had an item that maybe came from overseas and in a container, some of the items were very small and some were very big, there was another option here to assign it by either weight or volume. So your bigger items can carry more of a cost. And what will happen when I post this invoice, it's going to take these costs and add it to the value of my inventory on hand. So if I receive the jars at, I forget how many I received. Let's say I received 4,800, and let's say they were, 10 cents a piece. It's now going to take this 937 and add that as well. So the cost might be, I'm not going to do that in my head. It'll add to the cost. Instead of being 10 cents a piece, it might be 14 cents a piece to carry the value of the freight. All right. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about audit trail. Jennifer loves intercompany, and I love this part. Our audit trail in Silverleaf is really, we've set it up. It began as a conversation about how we can really track who's doing what. And there's kind of 3 things I'd like to show you that I think are kind of the pillars of how you can make sure that there's accountability, let's say, in your system. So we'll talk about user security. I want to show you change tracking, who did what, and our approval workflows, and we'll talk about our posting date management. Okay, so let's get, oops. Yes, I want to exit, and now let's go look at a few things here. First, let's talk about the users. When I opened up and we were talking about the intercompany, I said you can set security by users. And so if I go into my user list, I have a whole bunch of users, and we tend to give ourselves super user rights, but in the real world, you wouldn't want to do that. You'd want to be very selective of who's a super user. But my user Brian, if I come into here, you can see Brian has selected roles that he can do in this company. And so he's able to enter QC results, he can enter lab results, he can do label printing, but that's about it. Other users might be financial users. We can assign them to groups and give them different authority. And again, this can be done by company. And our Company Central app makes it a little bit easier to assign a person's roles across multiple companies. So that's the first thing I like to show about the security is the security on the users. We also, in our general ledger, can identify what dates a user is allowed to post to. Jennifer mentioned this again in Company Central. We're able to apply this across all companies at once. But here I've said that right now, my whole company can only post from July 1st to July 31st. But I'm in accounting and I still am working on June. And I might even be working on the audit from last year. I might need a much wider range of dates open. Here's the default. My users, I can now assign what date ranges they're allowed to use. So if I go into user setup, anyone who's listed with specific dates in here can post to those dates. So notice Jennifer and I have a wide open date. Jennifer can post to anything after January 1st. I'm set to post all of 22 and 24. Brian, we could lock down. Maybe he's only allowed to post for a different period of time. So you can set up these dates for each user. So we get control over what dates are used so you don't end up with things that got posted to previous periods. That's kind of what I would call the first pillar of our setup. Now let's look at our customers, and I'll show you a little bit something we call change tracking. Our change tracking app gives you a record of who edited what. So many times we're in a scenario where a user will come up to us and say, the software changed the data and I don't know how that happened, or I don't know who did that. And we wanted to solve for that problem. So here on Customer Canamed, if I come under Process Changes, here you'll see every time we edited this record. And in fact, you'll see that on March 31st, I changed their credit limit from $750,000 to $100,000. I tend to play around with the same data over and over again, so you can see the different things that I've changed over time on this account. Here I changed the salesperson from JP to JF. So if JP is wondering, well, who changed that? This is my account. You can easily come in and see that. Okay. We also, you'll see all over Business Central, our request approval button. This button allows us to set up workflows really anywhere. So maybe we have a workflow when a new customer is created that the credit manager has to approve that credit limit. So we could request approval for that. And that customer can't be used until it's been approved. Similarly, we can do that with items. Maybe we have a new finished good and we want the design team to make sure the bill of materials looks correct, or that the packaging is correct. We can set up approval workflows there. Finally, another approval workflow you could set up is that if, let's say, a customer's over their credit limit, the order can go through to your credit manager before you can place that order to them. So we get all kinds of control over our processes. So whereas change tracking is kind of after the fact, who changed this, the approval workflows allow you to control things before they're usable. Okay. Lastly, I'd like to talk about how our solution is scalable. Right now, you're running your business on QuickBooks, you've got spreadsheets, you might have a seed to sale solution that's that's written for the cannabis industry and doesn't take into thought all the extensive accounting requirements that a full ERP will have. So with our solution, Silverleaf, we know you'll be able to scale as your company grows. You'll be able to add new companies as you expand into other states. You'll be able to generate financial reports quickly and get your month-end closing process down. The new buzzword we hear all the time is there'll be a single source of the truth. What that means is, one spreadsheet might say something, QuickBooks might say something else, someone else might have something that says something else. All these different versions of data are hard to maintain and hard to validate. With an integrated ERP solution like Silverleaf, you'll always be able to see the reality of what's going on in real time. Also, as you grow, you'll be able to integrate with all the Microsoft Office tools. Silverleaf and Business Central integrate with Power BI, which is a dashboard reporting tool. We integrate with Microsoft Excel and Word. If you want to update a whole bunch of records at once, you can put them in Excel. You can send them to Excel, edit them, and bring them back in It will validate that the data is correct when you bring the data back in, and it will even track those changes in our change tracking solution. We also, a new feature that Microsoft added is we integrate with Microsoft Teams now. So if customer orders come in and things like that, you can communicate across your organization through Teams tied to the transaction. Or maybe you want someone to look again at a bill of materials, you can do that all through Teams. So that would be our 5 steps to financial success with Silverleaf.
Thank you again for joining us for today's session. And again, like I mentioned, keep an eye out for today's recording and those resources in your inbox. And we hope to see you join us for the rest of the sessions in the series.